the Immanuel Kant statement of the natural state of man is war. In in our day right now, everybody seems, at least in this country, or maybe in sort of Western civilization, they have this idea of perpetual peace that is going on, despite the fact that we've been at war for what, the past 20 years. We've been in different conflicts across the globe. But there's this idea of, we've now reached the point where we've got peace. So now our natural state is peace. And we have sort of taken this, I guess, almost a Hegelian evolutionary step towards leaving the past behind. And now we are better than what was before us. How do you sort of convince people, no, 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 just because we've, thousands of years have passed, we haven't changed as mankind. Human nature is still the same. It is still like the natural state of man is war.
Yeah, well, I think history shows that. And you guys are sons of history, students of history. The Romans are no different than we are, really. I've been spending a lot of time with the Roman writers and Roman history. What those soldiers fought for and what motivated them is very similar to what motivates us now. And I don't think we've actually been in a state of peace. I was born in 1949 and I went to college in 1967. The Vietnam War had already started at that point. So in my lifetime, we've been at war essentially since I was about 10.
Hey, history lovers. Dustin Bass here, and I've started a new history podcast called American Tells, where we explore the world through American history. New episodes come out every Monday and can be found wherever you listen, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. I hope you tune in and subscribe to my new podcast that presents all things pre 21st century American history through dramatic narratives, narrated by yours truly. And each episode comes standard with sound effects, awesome music, and my amazing accents, both foreign and domestic. Subscribe to American Tales with Dustin Bass today and join me as we explore the world through American history.
And here it is 60 years later, and we're still fighting wars that we don't want to win. I think that's the biggest difference now is that it's somehow rude to use overwhelming force on an opponent to put him down. And yet, this has been the mantra of the most successful generals throughout history. I just was reading Andrew Roberts' biography of Napoleon, and Napoleon says something that Sherman echoes half a century later, which is the most merciful kind of war is to get it over with.
Yeah.
You kill as many of them as you can until they stop fighting, and now you'll have peace. And that will come a lot faster if you don't restrain yourself. So, then you wander into war crimes and all kinds of subsets. But the objective of war, it has to be total victory. Um, Ulysses Grant was called unconditional surrender, in part because he actually used those words, and in part because that was his warrior ethos. Uh, he's certainly the one of the two or three greatest generals in American history. And when Lincoln gave him the assignment to bring him out from the army, from the Western Front, effectively in Tennessee, and back to Washington, he just wanted to win. And at that point, he didn't care very much how he did it. And so Grant said, yes, sir. And then if you follow Grant's campaign, once he gets to Washington, you see it's an inexorable meat grinder of a fight. He understood as early as Shiloh, and I have a chapter in Last Stands on Shiloh, that this war wasn't going to be over in 5 minutes. That the Confederates were dug in. They were good fighters. They were outnumbered, but they had sort of a esprit de corps that the Yankee army lacked for much of the war, and he was going to have to fight them to the end, and they were going to have to be destroyed. So Grant knows this right away, and after Lincoln has wasted his time with all these parade ground generals and guys that didn't want to fight. I mean, Meade only won at Gettysburg by accident in a way because he wasn't even looking for a fight. He wasn't trying to engage Lee's army in any meaningful sense. They just bumped into each other. But once Grant takes the reins, the South is doomed, and he rolls up Lee in a textbook fashion. It's a good example of masculine willpower. Lee Grant just won't take no for an answer, and he gets beat. And he gets beat bad. Cold Harbor, he says in his memoirs, was the worst thing he ever did. He just regretted that effectively 18th century attack in a 19th century war. Uh, but once past that, he and his generals, including Sherman and Sheridan, and George Armstrong Custer, who's the subject of another chapter in Last Stands, they roll him up pretty good. And in fact, Custer, who I have a great sort of sneaking admiration for, it's the longest chapter in the book by far. Uh, Custer was was the first Union general to whom the South surrendered. So Custer's everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. He's at Appomattox. He's in the picture of Grant Lee signing the armistice. As I said, he received the surrender of some Confederate units even before Lee showed up to sign the articles. And then, of course, he goes out west and makes himself into either a notorious or heroic figure, depending on which period of American history you're discussing Custer in. So uh, the idea was to mirror these guys from the earliest Greeks, from Leonidas to my own father, and what motivated them and how they did it. And we tend to look at them and say, well, that was brave, or that was this. None of them ever says, boy, was I brave when I did that. Maybe crazy, but not brave. They say, as my dad did to me in the last chapter of Last Stands, we went to work. I said, how'd you feel when 100,000 Chinese came running down the hill at you, screaming and firing off rockets? And he said, well, we went to work. And that's it. And a point I've made a lot in discussing this book is, again, goes back to the Romans. If you follow your training and you maintain discipline, you have a chance to survive even something as bad as Kane or the Chosen Reservoir. If you don't, if you panic, if you break the line, you'll definitely get killed. So that's what happened to the Romans at the Teutoburg Forest. They got ambushed, almost American Indian style, by the German barbarians, and their lines broke, and they tried to run. The equestrians, who were the noblemen, i.e., people that could afford a horse, they tried to get away. They were hunted down, and their heads wound up nailed to trees all over the Teutoburg Forest. And years later, when the Romans came back to kind of pick up the pieces, they found the skulls of their companions literally nailed to trees. You can't panic, you can't run, and you have to stay cool. If you break your cool, you'll lose. And that's all there is to it, really.